academic life in the United States, especially in the last, I'll say, 5 years, as Jonathan Haidt and others have noted, has really, really been damaged by a culture of what used to be called political correctness, but I don't think that quite captures it, of fundamental intolerance, of a deep illiberalism, a deep hostility to free debate and free inquiry, that is killing the great institutions of American academia. So yeah, I mean, I'm as proud as it could be of being an American, but I'm at the same time depressed by some of the trends that I see in the country today because they seem so at odds with the first principles of American life.
Did you notice a difference on the academic side when you were with intellectuals, the way European intellectuals would perhaps talk about something versus the way Americans did, or maybe a different focus or anything like that?
Well, here I think there is a disappointment which I need to admit to. I came to the United States believing that American universities were the places where the biggest intellects had the biggest arguments, and that was part of the appeal of Harvard. I admit there was this sense that Oxford and Cambridge had been the great universities of the 19th and 20th century, but now in the 21st century, you really wanted to be at Harvard. And I think over time, it was a slow process. I became disillusioned with the American Academy. And I found that it was becoming less and less hospitable to the kind of rambunctious free inquiry that motivates me. And now I've reached the point where I look back nostalgically on the Oxford of the 1980s, where there was simply no question of your free speech being circumscribed. On the contrary, in the 1980s, we kind of found ourselves constantly pushing the boundaries of what could be said. As undergraduates, we found our professors were intellectually an extraordinarily diverse bunch. There were the diehard Marxists, the kind of Eric Hobsbawm types, and then there were the high Tories, the Jeremy Cattos, and it was a tremendously enriching experience. Academic life in the United States, especially in the last, I'll say, 5 years, as Jonathan Haidt and others have noted, has really, really been damaged by a culture of what used to be called political correctness, but I don't think that quite captures it, of fundamental intolerance, of a deep illiberalism, a deep hostility to free debate and free inquiry, that is killing the great institutions of American academia. So yeah, I mean, I'm as proud as it could be of being an American, but I'm at the same time depressed by some of the trends that I see in the country today because they seem so at odds with the first principles of American life.
Is it weird for you to see this spread across the world at the same time? Because last year when I was at Oxford, and I got to speak at Oxford Union, which it sort of feels like a dream that I even got to speak there. But just being there and being around the hundreds of years of history and walking around, and you feel this thing that you guys have that we have much less of, obviously, because of the breadth of history. You feel this generation after generation of caring about knowledge and history and all of these things. And even just in the last couple of days, I've seen these articles that Oxford, there are professors pushing to have more lenient grades for students of color, and just the rest of the sort of what I would call intellectual rot that we've seen across these schools. It must be particularly painful for you to see it happen at a place like Oxford.
I think so, although I sometimes get the sense that that it's not that deep, the rot in Oxford. For example, I was very pleased that the Vice-Chancellor, Louise Richardson, and other leaders of the university dismissed again the calls to tear down a statue of Cecil Rhodes that stands in Oriel College. Cambridge, I think, has been rather more inclined to appease these forces of iconoclasm. It is iconoclasm, the tearing down of statues. And I know that I'm a conservative when I see statues being torn down and a little part of me winces. It doesn't really much matter who the statue is. I prefer statues to be built. And I think Oxford has held the line there thus far. But as is always the case, there are elements within any academic society that see opportunities in the ideologies of wokeness, see ways in which they can advance their own careers by championing these outlandish and illiberal ideas. The great danger is that it becomes a norm that a university should be intellectually homogenous, that we should pursue every kind of diversity except intellectual and ideological diversity. And I worry that eventually what has been happening at American universities will overcome the healthier forces in Oxford and Cambridge. That's not to say that we couldn't do more at these universities to make them attractive to and appealing to people from minority communities and from the white working class, which is notably underrepresented at these places. But the mistake that's always made in these debates is to think that the problem lies with the universities rather than with the systems of education that simply discourage students or make them unable to apply to elite institutions. I've always said I believe passionately in educational opportunity and the social mobility that it creates. My parents were the first in their families to go to university. And what I see in the United States and in the UK are failing schools that don't allow talented young people, whether they're from minority communities or from the working class, to get anywhere close to applying to elite universities. That's what we need to fix. And there are lots of ways of doing it, but one doesn't hear those discussed.
So I know we could spend 8 hours dissecting wokeness and the rest of it, but I want to shift from it a little bit. But I just have one other question on the woke thing, since we've treaded into those waters. As a conservative academic, you were obviously, and we talked a little bit about this last time, on the outside of what most sort of academic circles sort of think is acceptable, even in historical in history department. Do you think that conservatives have a better defense against wokeness than liberals? So, for example, John Haidt, who I've had on the show, and many of the other academics that that I've talked to that come from the more liberal side, I sense that although they're making good arguments, I don't think they have good defenses against this because of the sort of openness of liberalism, that it's being used against itself. And I do sense that conservatism as a worldview or as a philosophical lens does have some protections that liberalism doesn't. Do you agree with that?
Well, it's true that we wouldn't be in quite this situation if it hadn't been for liberal professors giving jobs to progressive professors who then gave jobs to Marxists and cultural Marxists. I mean, conservative professors, these are becoming oxymorons because there are so few conservatives left in the American academy. I mean, the figures are clear. It's not like this is an old problem that we've always had. Over time, the ratio of registered Democrats to Republicans has risen steadily to the point that you can't calculate it in some departments because there are zero Republicans. And I think that trend broadly is explicable because liberals felt that they should hire people to the left of them, underestimating the extent to which those people would fundamentally differ on the principles of, say, the project of historical scholarship. It is not the goal of a history department to impose on the past the ideals of the progressives of 2020. That's the ultimate condescension to the past. Conservatives have understood better, I think, the dangers. And the tragedy has been that conservatives have been poorly organized. I mean, the extinction of conservatives in, say, history departments isn't just the fault of liberals hiring progressives. It's also that the conservatives did poorly when it came to the most basic organization that has to happen in academia, the patronage networks, getting your students into good positions. I don't think conservatives were very good at that. My conservative mentors were wonderful intellectuals, people like Norman Stone. But Norman would not be remembered, I think, for his organizational skills, for his writing certainly, but definitely not for his deftness at academic politics. So it's partly, I think, because conservatives were rather too busy writing books and perhaps occasionally drinking bottles of wine and not working hard enough at the committee stages to make sure that the right candidates got hired.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about academia instead of nonstop yelling, check out our academia playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, check out our full episode playlist. They're all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.